Welcome to the Word on Wednesday. This is your midweek online Bible study and devotion at Mackville Christian Church for April 15th of 2026. We're talking about Old Testament personalities, and Moses was a great personality in the Old Testament. He's undoubtedly one of the most well-known of all biblical leaders. Most of us know some of the great episodes of his life, such as receiving the Ten Commandments from God, such as leading the children of Israel out of Egypt and then standing at the Red Sea and seeing it part to walk across on dry land. I think about those moments and I think I can't comprehend them. I can't imagine what he felt. I just had to be an unbelievable spiritual high. But folks, just like us, Moses had his moments. In fact, in Exodus chapter 2, he had a moment that, at least in my eyes, was a lot worse than anything what most of us would experience today. He let his anger get the best of him, and he killed a man. I want you to read the account in Exodus chapter 2, starting in verse 11. One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, "Why do you strike your companion?" He answered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you kill the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely this thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian. He sat down by a well. If you only knew of Moses through just a few of your stories, or if you just saw the movie The Ten Commandments, would you have ever thought about such a scenario? Moses let his anger get the best of him. And he killed someone. It was actually more than that. It was premeditated almost, because you look at verse 12, Exodus chapter 2 and verse 12, you look at what Moses did. It wasn't just a reaction. He saw this happening, but then you look at verse 12, he looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. He made sure nobody saw him, or at least that's what he thought. He thought he was covering all the bases, and he said, "No one saw me." But the very next day, we find out that somebody did. The next day, Moses saw two Hebrews, his own people, fighting. So he asked them, "Why are you duking it out?" And the one who was in the wrong said to him, "Who made you the prince and judge over me? Are you going to strike me down like you did that the Egyptian?" Folks, Moses was nailed to the wall. He knew then that somebody had seen him and was afraid that Pharaoh would have him killed. So he ran away to the land of Midian, which was about 250, 300 miles away. In other words, he was wanting to get away, and he wanted to make sure nobody could find him. Now, we all know the end story, that God still turned things around for Moses. and used him to lead the Israelites. And if you go on and read the verses following, especially the way that's broken down, says, and he sat down by a well. That leads into the next few verses, where we find that Moses found a wife named Zipporah there in Midian. And Moses probably thought, well, I've settled down here. I'll be tending my father-in-law's flocks, and everything will be fine. Again, God had other plans, and we'll talk about that next week. But think back in Moses' history. You may remember the account of Moses' mother putting him in a little basket and placing him in the bulrushes of the Nile River because Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had ordered all the Hebrew boys to be killed. Hebrew baby boys to be killed, that is. Pharaoh's daughter found him and raised him as her son. So Moses had all the privileges of royalty. In fact, in Acts chapter 7, Stephen is giving his sermon, and he noted that Moses had the finest education available. The Jewish historian Josephus wrote that Moses was made a general in the Egyptian army when Egypt was invaded by the Ethiopians. So before he fled, he had everything going for him. He had it all, or so it would seem. That leads up to the text that we're talking about. He killed a man and then he ran. Let me go back to that text and ask you, have you ever messed up? And I mean messed up in ways that you can't really believe? I think most people have. Most of us wouldn't be able to say, thankfully, that you've killed somebody like Moses did. But almost everyone has some kind of skeleton in his closet. Something that you certainly aren't proud of, might be reluctant to talk about. But let me remind you a couple of things that jump out at me about this little incident in the life of Moses. You might think that no one knows, but someone does. If you watch the crime shows, either fiction like Criminal Minds or Law and Order, or true life stories like Cold Case Files or 48 Hours, things like that, almost invariably someone seems to know what happened. They may not want to talk, but someone knows. And the key is finding that person and getting them to talk. Usually someone knows. And ultimately, whatever your sin is, maybe another person may not know, but ultimately God knows, doesn't he? God knows. So you can try to run from sin, but you can't hide. But there's another side of that as well, and that is that God can still use you. We often point to people, famous people who had open sinful lifestyles, and then turn around and start following God. If you're in my Sunday school class, you know that I am just absolutely fascinated, yet inspired by the story of country music legend Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash was one of the original outlaws. As a friend of mine said, he wrote his own program. He did things like he wanted to do. But he had a remarkable journey to redemption. It's just an amazing story. There are others in history, such as Chuck Colson, who was involved in the Watergate scandal. John Newton, back in the 1800s, a slave trader who became a Christian and wrote the song Amazing Grace. I think about more recently, Phil Robertson, who was a drunk. He became the recognizable leader of the Duck Dynasty family and a renowned witness for the gospel. On my website, KentuckySings.com, I have a story I just published this week. Last week, I was so blessed to interview Christian music soloist Joseph Habedank, one of the finest men I've ever met. One of the top Christian soloists today. Great, great music, but he has such a story. And at every concert, he tells how many days he's been sober from his addiction. He says, I was a liar and a con man. And last Thursday night when we saw them in Lawrenceburg, he said, I've been sober now 4,702 days. Those are wonderful and powerful stories. But there are many people who have dark pasts that we don't know about. They may have not talked about it publicly, and folks, that's more than okay. If you've got something in your past you don't want to talk about, that's okay, as long as you talk to God about it. Just like these people, they've talked to God and begged forgiveness, and you might be in that same situation. Let me assure you that God will listen. You may have cries for help, cries for forgiveness, and just like Moses, he can and will use you. At Macville, we've started singing a song at the end of the service. This was my idea. It's called It Is No Secret What God Can Do, and I truly believe that. It is no secret what God can do. If you've gotten away from him, I invite you to come back to him. He'll take you back. Start walking with him today. Folks, I'll see you Sunday at Macville Christian Church. Sunday school at 9:30. Worship at 10:30. We'll see you then. Take care and have a great, great week.